In this lesson, we'll talk about some of the image adjustment brushes and how we can use those to modify some of our textures. So here we have our T-Rex, and you can see that we have a number of paint layers across a number of different channels associated with his textures. And so let's say that at this point we come to the conclusion that we need to adjust some of these textures. So rather than repaint, it would be really nice to be able to, for instance, shift the hue. If we look at this and say, well, I don't actually like the red color, I actually want them to be a little bit more, I don't know, green or orange. Without changing all of the work that we've done to the texture, it would be nice if we could actually just change that color, or for instance, change the saturation, maybe darken some areas up, lighten some areas up. Well, we can do that using the image adjustment brushes, and we can find those under the Paint Tools tray here. And so if we take a look at these, you can see we've got blur, dodge and burn, contrast, sponge, hue and hue shift, and invert. And if you've used something like Photoshop, you may be familiar with what some of these do. So we're going to use hue shift first. So let's say that we do want this to be a different color. So rather than repaint this or create a new layer, let's actually use the hue shift to just shift this red color. So before we do that, I want to actually take a quick look at the color wheel here. So if we take a look at this, you can see that we have red right here, and as it goes around, we've got green, blue, purple, so on. So if we think of this as 0, meaning the kind of the base color that we've got here, and go counterclockwise, we can think of this in terms of degrees. So 90 degrees would be, from the red, would be kind of green. Okay, so that means 45 degrees would be this yellowish orange. Okay, 180 degrees would be this blue. So we'll just think about this as we go in and set some of our properties for our hue shift brush. So let's go ahead and activate that. Now we can see that we have a hue shift value above the brush size and strength. That shift is set, maybe set to something else, but right now for us it's set to 90, meaning it would shift this red to something like green, which is not really what we want. So we want something a little bit more orange than red, so we're not going to move too much around the color wheel. Let's do maybe 10 or 15, rather 15 or 20 degrees around the color wheel. All right. Now another thing that we might think about is the fact that it's kind of hard to get into some of these crevices, and also we want to be able to paint over this in a single stroke ideally, so that we don't have to go over areas that we've already painted and potentially shift that hue again another 20 degrees, modifying that hue. So to be able to see this a little bit better, we can actually go ahead and flatten this to UV space, which we touched on earlier. So here we can see that we have this flattened out, and so now we can come in and on the body color texture, you can see we've got here, we can come in and shift this hue. So we can just start going in here and painting our red, and you can see how that shifts that more to the orange. Now if we were to let up and go back over this, what we've already painted in orange, it would again shift that hue another 20 degrees. So I'm going to go in here and just shift all of these red parts. And you can go over the whole thing if you want to. You may have to go in and adjust some of the areas that you may not want to be a different hue. But otherwise you can just go in, just paint across the entire thing. You want to make sure that it matches up so that everything kind of go over every item with a single stroke, so you're not adding onto your stroke there. Okay, we'll kind of come in here around the back and the head here, and just use our hue shift. And so this is a lot easier because we're able to maintain and keep all of that variation that we've added so far into the skin, and just shift the entire texture over to that orange. All right. I'll go ahead and finish up by shifting the tail down here. And do that. Okay, let's go ahead and shift that tail and some of these other pieces in here. All right, and then once we're done, okay, all we have to do is go ahead and go back to Mesh and unflatten from UV space. And so here you can see our new orange version. Now if we want to clean something up, now I kind of avoided the eyes a little bit. If we wanted to kind of clean that up, we could come in here on some of these areas that are still red and just kind of shift that, keeping in mind that as we get down here towards the parts that are orange, that's going to be shifted a little bit more. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, a couple of other brushes that are going to be really useful are the dodge and burn. And so burn is going to darken up areas, and you can darken up the shadows, the midtones, the highlights, or you can just affect everything. And dodge is going to lighten those up. So let's go ahead and use burn to add a little bit of variation to the skin. So I'm just going to affect the midtones, and let's use a stamp for this, and we'll just randomize that. We've got an exposure setting and also strength. I'm going to turn the mirroring back on. I'm going to take the strength down a little bit, dial the brush size up a bit. Okay, and then we can come in here and just start to break up the skin a little bit just by darkening color. So we're not adding any sort of new color, we're just kind of darkening out that orange and just kind of break it up a little bit. And we can use different alphas to help us do that as well. I'm going to come in here and just kind of darken that area up. This can be good for also maybe some areas, some crevice areas in here where we want to kind of just darken things up a little bit, you know, underneath, maybe underneath the legs a bit. Just areas we want to kind of darken up a little. Okay. Now we can also use dodge in the same sort of way, only this will actually lighten things up. So let's, again, we'll get our stamp. Okay, so we can just come in here and just start to lighten this up. So again, just adding some variation. You may want to come in here and also along the bottom area where we haven't added too much variation yet, just kind of use dodge and burn to just break some of those areas up a bit. Okay, and it just is a quick way of adding that sort of variation to something like skin that will have that sort of different blotchy areas of color in there that's really not very even. And so we can use dodge and burn to do that. We might also highlight some of the raised areas. So we could come in here with our dodge and just on these muscles just kind of highlight those raised areas a little bit. Okay, same thing with burn. We may want to burn in some of the areas on the interior there. Okay, maybe go back to burn, and up here on the head, maybe come in and darken up some of the areas inside here, some of these recessed areas. Okay, maybe up in here. Okay, also maybe around the eye. I want to kind of darken that up a little bit as well. Okay, and I'm here on the next to the highest level, subdivision level here. Okay, so we just kind of darken that up a little bit. We darken this up around the eye here. Okay, so it's a nice way to just add a little bit of contour to your texture here, and just darken up some areas that may be inset. Maybe they don't get as much light. Maybe you can fake some shadows in there. Just kind of make it a little bit darker. As you come in here, maybe inside this area, you can kind of darken this up a little bit. Okay, so it's good for just adding a lot of variation in here. All right. Now, if we want to actually modify some of the saturation of our dinosaur, we can use sponge. So we have an amount, which is what we're going to change. So if we go ahead and take this, and let's kind of raise this up, and I'm just going to use a stamp just to maintain our kind of breaking everything up. Now, if we hover over this, you'll see that it's going to tell you that the positive value is going to reduce the color saturation. So right now it's set to 1, so that's actually going to take some saturation out of this color. So if we were to go in here, you can see that it's actually taking that saturation out, which maybe is a little bit too much. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and undo that and just change this to something like 0.3 or so. Maybe take the strength down a little bit, and then we can come in here and just kind of make some areas, create some areas of more saturation and then some areas of lesser saturation. So we can come in here, you can see how it's kind of desaturating that a little bit. Okay, just kind of breaking that up. And then we can also come in and add a negative value to that, to our amount. It's 0.3 right now. Okay, so we can actually make that a little bit more saturated by changing that value. Okay, and we can come in and you can see how that's sort of adding a little bit more saturation back in there. Okay, so you can affect the saturation using sponge. You can also go in and change, kind of paint through and adjust the contrast here as well. And also we looked at using invert to actually invert those values. Okay, so just go in and play around with the dodge and burn. You can also blur as well and adjust the existing textures that you've created. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and finish that up. In the next lesson, we're going to look at a few ways that we can use Mudbox together with Photoshop. So we'll take a look at that next.